This is Larry Rosenthal of the Goldman School with the Eightfold Path. What is it? This short video will provide an overview of this unit with remarks on the Eightfold Path as a system for thinking about problem solving. We'll then turn to listing the method's 8 steps, and we'll group them into 4 stages: scoping, ideative, analytic, and reporting. And then we'll turn to some brief thoughts on what the Eightfold Path can help us do in addressing problems like post-incarceration unemployment, which is the topic that was addressed in my interview with Professor Steve Raphael, those videos that you saw immediately prior to this one. First, let's think about problem solving and a system of thinking. If we step back from the kind of thinking that problem solving entails, we realize that it involves many steps. Let's list just some of them. We would wish to identify the scope of the problem that we would analyze. We'd want to learn more about the situation. We'd want to imagine possible solutions, including ones that might not yet have been tried. And we'd have to create a way to figure out what will work best. There may be other specific method steps that we would need to engage in, but this is just 4. By listing these 4 alone, we realize that this is complicated work, and we need to conduct ourselves in a relatively systematic way. This systematic thinking would give each step separate attention, carefully, one at a time. And ultimately, we'll find that by taking each step in turn and tracking our work, complex problems become manageable. And that's really the goal of Eugene Bardak's Eightfold Path method and the goal of this course, to help you understand how careful thinking can make complex problems more manageable. Let's list and group these 8 steps. First, the list. Each is called conveniently a fold or a step. First, define the problem. Next, assemble some evidence. Third, construct the alternatives, and then select the criteria. Fifth, project the outcomes. Sixth, construct the trade-offs. Seventh, decide. And 8th and last, tell your story. In our course, we'll be going over each of these steps very carefully with a unit devoted to each one. But let's look at how each of them might be grouped. At the top, when we define the problem, we're engaged in a process of scoping our work. What will be inside of our analysis within a specific problem we've chosen and defined, and what will lie outside of that analysis for another day. The next 3 steps we might group in a process called ideative work. We're assembling evidence, making ourselves smarter and garnering learning and understanding of the problem. We're constructing alternatives and thinking about possibilities for solutions, and then we're selecting criteria by which we'd be able to identify and measure the performance of those alternatives. Each of these efforts is part of an open-ended, creative, and ideative process. The next 2 steps are the most demanding and challenging in the Eightfold Path. Project the outcomes and construct the trade-offs involve processes that are analytic. And lastly, when we decide which of the alternatives is the winning alternative, and then prepare to tell our client and to tell the world about which recommendation is best and why, we're undertaking an activity which largely involves reporting the results of our work. Here are our 8 steps and 4 groupings that you might use to help keep the steps straight. Lastly, for this video lecture, let's talk about thinking systematically about policy problems in the context of one example we have in this unit, and that's Professor Raphael's discussion of post-incarceration unemployment problems. Review those videos from that interview on that topic, post-incarceration unemployment. Perhaps take careful notes. And as you'll see in the course to come, as we begin to wrap our arms around a complicated set of problems underlying a condition such as post-incarceration unemployment rates that are higher than we would like, the Eightfold Path approach will do the following. It will help us untangle multiple problems. We'll come to understand that the relative unpreparedness of a former prisoner upon release may be a problem we want to analyze separately from the job market discrimination they may face out in the job market as a former prisoner. These problems are related, but one of the initial tasks we'll have is to choose a well-scoped problem in our Define the Problem step that will leave a lot of the hard work on other aspects of the situation for another day. Next, we'll want to determine what evidence is most needed, and as Professor Raphael discussed, there are many sources of data, surveys of existing prisoners, results of the trainings that we may give them within the walls of the prison in these programs, the design and effectiveness of programs for placement outside the walls of the prison. This will all be feeding into some evidence that we will collect, and there's a separate specific task on the Eightfold Path method which will be devoted to assembling the evidence. When we think about alternatives, we'll be thinking in an open-ended way, an imaginative way, to envision new strategies to address problems that we've identified. We'll look at existing programs in federal, state, and local settings, such as in the post-incarceration unemployment setting, and then we'll think about how those programs can be improved or perhaps replaced with better ones. Lastly, we'll ask ourselves very carefully, how will we know which policies are best? How will we know when we're succeeding? Reducing the recidivism rate may be one attractive measure, although Professor Raphael has many comments about the complexity of using that metric. Moreover, we may wish to look at the rate of employment and the duration of employment. We have to think very carefully in this system of thinking about the criteria we will select to determine what success looks like. Lastly, we're going to have to try to predict the future, and we're going to have to figure out what each one of these new ideas might cost us. When we do so, we'll be engaging in those analytic steps on the Eightfold Path of projecting the outcomes and confronting the trade-offs. Let's review. We've been talking about the Eightfold Path. What is it? And we've discussed how it operates as a system for ordered thinking about problem solving. We've looked at the list of the method's 8 steps, and we've grouped them into these 4 stages: scoping, ideative, analytic, and reporting. And lastly, we've talked about what the Eightfold Path may do with problems like post-incarceration unemployment. Thank you for your attention, and now move on to the homework problems. Check your work for this unit.